Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at our top stories for today. US President Donald Trump warns Hamas that all hell will break loose if hostages are not released. This follows the terrorist group's decision to postpone the hostage exchange, while Israel has increased their troop presence around Gaza. Meanwhile, President Trump has signed an executive order which puts a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium imports. Starting on the 4th of March, Trump says no country will be exempt from the import duty. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is all set to discuss Trump's push to end the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Talks are set to take place at the Munich Security Conference as strikes are traded between Russia and Ukraine. North Korea has accused the United States of a hostile military act after a US Navy submarine was seen docked in South Korean waters. North Korea's defense ministry say the move could lead to a military confrontation. In a bold move to reshape United States' trade policies, US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to enforce 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. This will hit allies like Canada, the UK, EU nations, Japan and South Korea. The move, effective on March the 12th, 2025, aims to boost US industries, particularly steel. Canada's steel sector warns of major disruption, while the European Commission pledges retaliation. Global markets show signs of tariff fatigue, yet US stocks remain resilient. Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says an exemption is being considered for the nation, but Trump later stated there will be no exceptions, while still suggesting Australia's trade surplus could warrant special treatment. Joining us to discuss this topic, we're first of all joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political risk analyst joining us from Taiwan. Ross, thank you for your time. Trump has now signed this order, as we were expecting after his talks on Air Force One yesterday. I want to look at the reaction that we've had from these allies of the United States and specifically look at the impact that this might have on the United States. Do you think Trump is ostracizing America from its allies?
No, I wouldn't describe it that way. I think the allies, and you mentioned countries like South Korea, Canada, and others, I think they were prepared for this. At least their governments were prepared, not necessarily the steel and aluminum industry. But Trump has been very clear, going back to his first term, that he believes tariffs are an appropriate tool to use when foreign producers, regardless of the product, have easy access to the United States, and the United States doesn't necessarily have reciprocal access to those countries, and or when companies in these other countries benefit from government subsidies, which frankly has often been the case with steel and aluminum producers in other countries, including allied countries of the United States. This is a long-running problem specific to the steel and aluminum industry, and frankly it comes as no surprise whatsoever that Trump is using tariffs on these products.
Ross, do you think Trump is waging a tariff war on other nations, using tariffs as a way of getting what he wants? We've seen it, of course, happen with immigration. He's made his policies and threatened tariffs against Mexico and also Canada, relating also to the transportation of drugs. But do you think this is Trump trying to say, I'm going to get what I want and I'm going to put these tariffs in place until I do so?
Well, President Trump, during the campaign last year, said that tariffs are the most beautiful word in the dictionary. So we know how he feels about tariffs. He's made that quite clear by words as well as action. He thinks it's a very effective tool. And also keep in mind that for President Trump, probably the top foreign policy issue, whether with friendly or unfriendly countries, are the trade imbalances that U.S. has with many of these countries. And the issues that the United States might have with other countries is very lengthy. But if there's one issue that President Trump is passionate about, it's trade imbalances, and he's seeking to address that through the use of tariffs.
Yes, also joining us to discuss this topic is Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, who is the founder and CEO of Xeroen and president for the Centre of Digital Economy Policy Research. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for your time today. I want to look at the impact that this might have on the American economy. Now, there are experts which are saying this could directly impact the economy in the short term, but do you think Trump is looking beyond that and looking to boost the American economy for years to come?
Well, if this is an economic policy, then there is much to be asked for, because economic policy is not that straightforward and simple that we increase the tariff and suddenly the US economy will become very competitive. It unfortunately doesn't work that way. Let me lay it out as to why. Steel is an important component for, let's say, automobile industry, which is an extremely important industry. The moment the cost of steel goes up by 25%, which means domestic producers of steel in US will be able to sell their steel with that added margin of 25%. So for the automobile companies, steel will willy-nilly come at 25% higher cost. So when they start exporting their cars back, they won't find a market because their cars will be that much more expensive than any other cars. In fact, in the year that US evacuated Afghanistan, in the same year, the last of the US automobile companies and motorcycle companies left India. They could not compete with the Indian automobile companies, the Korean, the Chinese, and the Japanese. They could not compete with them. And the same measures that India puts on US companies and US automobile companies, the same measures are being put on all other companies. There's no discrimination between US companies and any other companies. The upshot is that we have the Koreans and the Chinese and the Japanese having a share of the Indian market, a very significant share of the Indian automobile market, which is a very large market, but we hardly have any trace of US automobile companies, and that's where the problem is. Now, perhaps what you started by saying is true, that it is not really the intention to put in tariff of 25%, but more to use it as a leverage for getting everything else. And sure, that's a great thing to do for any country. They should negotiate what is best for them in as transparent a manner. And if it's a point of leverage, I think it's a great step. But if it's a point to enable US economy to become competitive, well, that doesn't seem to be a good step from any economic principles.
Dr. Bhattacharya, staying with you, I'd like to discuss the comments that have come from the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. He says that the country is exempt from these tariffs, but there doesn't seem to be clarity over that coming from the White House and coming from Donald Trump. What do you think the outcome will be in this specific circumstance where there is a surplus deal?
Well, it is basically, again, going back to what you said, that US does not differentiate between allies and adversaries when it comes to trade. And this is one great example. For Australia, export of primary goods is extremely important. The Australian economy is supported by export of primary goods, be it mining, be it agriculture, be it dairy products. That's what Australia does. And US is a very large market for Australia. A 25% increase on the import of goods from Australia, and primarily steel is what we're talking about, and aluminium, will kind of be a death blow for Australia. It will impact their economy very, very significantly. And you don't want to do that to an ally, especially which is located in a very strategic position on this planet. So one wonders what really is going on, because you would like to make your allies stronger. And the Australian economy is minuscule in front of the US economy. So being able to support the Australian economy is apparently, I mean, at first look, is the right thing to do. We are clearly not privy to the thought process of the current US administration as to what they're really thinking. Are they thinking that they will have a US base in Australia and therefore they're negotiating? But you do need to have military presence in order to have peace on this planet, and therefore to carry on with trade and our lives in a regular way. And destroying the foundation of that in whichever way, and trade is war in another way, is perhaps doesn't sound like the right thing to do.
Yes, and Ross, before we end this discussion and move on, I'd like to ask you a question relating to the tariffs that have been imposed on steel and aluminium, but relate those back to the ones that we saw enforced or allegedly or supposedly enforced, on Canada and Mexico. We saw those rescinded. Do you think we're going to see something similar? And what would it take from these allied nations in order for the tariffs to be put to bed for at least a couple of months like we saw with Canada and Mexico?
Clearly, President Trump is willing to withhold the tariffs for a period of time with some of the trading partners, but they have to offer something. And typically what President Trump is looking for in this situation, he's looking for market access for US products. And President Trump needs to be convinced that those countries are offering the same access to their markets that the United States offers to manufacturers from those countries. So yes, President Trump's often accused of being transactional, and that might very well apply in this situation. He's looking for what the other countries could offer, and specifically offer to American manufacturers.
Ross Feingold, Dr. Bhattacharya, thank you both very much for your time. Trump's tariffs aren't going anywhere, and we, of course, will bring you all the updates. But we now move to our top story, where a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is hanging by a delicate thread as Trump sends warning over to Hamas. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis rages as civilians evacuate the West Bank. Here is the full report.
Ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is appearing increasingly fragile after US President Trump's warnings.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out.
Trump's threat comes after Hamas armed wing said the next hostage release due to take place on Sunday will be postponed. The group accused Israel of failing to meet its commitments under the ceasefire agreement. Hamas cited the lack of aid deliveries and the death of 3 Gazans on Sunday. Hamas later said it announced the delay 5 days in advance to give mediators time to push Israel to comply. Reacting to the news, the Israeli military said that it would significantly reinforce areas around the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, residents of the West Bank have started to evacuate amid Israeli military presence.
لكن هذا الشعب متجذر في أرضه ولا يمكن أن يخرج هو يخرج لفترة ولكنه لا بد أن يعود لأنهم هم القادمون ونحن الثابتون في هذه الأرض إن شاء الله.
All eyes are on Israel and Palestine as the humanitarian crisis continues. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates from across Europe. Officials announced on Monday that UK authorities arrested 609 individuals on a crackdown on undocumented migrants and people smuggling gangs. This is a sharp increase from 352 arrests in January last year. The arrests occurred at over 800 locations, including nail bars, restaurants, car washes and convenience stores. The operation is part of the new Labour government's plan to combat illegal migration and organised crime. An 11-year-old French girl, Louise Lazalle, was found stabbed to death in the woods south of Paris, near her school. She had been missing since leaving school on Friday afternoon. A police source said she suffered multiple wounds, likely from a knife to her neck and torso. Authorities arrested a 23-year-old man on suspicion of murder. Prosecutors confirmed the arrest as investigations continue. The case has shocked the local community, with police working to determine the motive. Romanian President Klaus Iohannis has announced his resignation. He stated he would leave office on February the 12th amid political turmoil. His decision follows a top court's annulment of the presidential election over alleged Russian interference. Far-right candidate Calin Georgescu's surprise first-round victory added to tensions. Protests erupted last month, with some demanding Iohannis to step down. The court had ruled he would stay until a successor was elected. The election rerun is scheduled for May the 4th and May the 18th. French authorities have arrested 6 people after 2 migrant bodies were found on a northern France beach following a failed channel crossing attempt. The victims, including a 30-year-old Afghanistan man, were trying to swim to a small boat offshore. The arrests involved suspects aged between 19 and 50 from Afghanistan, Sudan and Iran. Despite winter conditions, channel crossings continue. Germany has warned Europe would respond in a united and determined manner after US President Donald Trump announced 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. France warned it would retaliate with counter-summaries if targeted. The EU has yet to receive an official notice of the tariffs. Habeck discussed the issue with the EU Trade Commissioner and business groups. Berlin urged dialogue between the EU and US to prevent escalation. The The Church of England's governing body began a week-long meeting in London on Monday amid unprecedented crisis over sexual abuse scandals. The gathering follows last month's resignation of Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby, who stepped down over the controversy. Allegations against a priest and a bishop have also emerged. On Tuesday, the Assembly will review new safeguarding measures. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is all set to meet US Vice President JD Vance at the Munich Security Conference. This comes amid Washington's push to end the nearly 3-year war with Russia. Here are the latest updates.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will meet US Vice President JD Vance at the Munich Security Conference. The two are set to discuss the Trump administration's push for an end to the almost 3-year war between Russia and Ukraine. US President Donald Trump also confirms that he will soon dispatch his special envoy Keith Kellogg, who is tasked with drawing up a proposal to halt the fighting, to Ukraine. Trump has said he wants to broker an end to the war, but has not outlined a detailed proposal to bring the two sides to the negotiating table. Both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin have previously ruled out direct talks with each other, and there appears to be little ground where the two could strike a deal. Meanwhile, Zelensky called for real peace and effective security guarantees for Ukraine. Putin is demanding that Ukraine withdraw from swathes of its south and east that Kyiv still has control over, and considers closer ties between Ukraine and NATO inadmissible. Zelensky has meanwhile rejected any territorial concessions to Moscow, though he has acknowledged that Ukraine might have to rely on diplomatic means to secure the return of some territory. Kyiv fears that any settlement that does not include hard military commitments, such as NATO membership or the deployment of peacekeeping troops, will just allow the Kremlin time to regroup and rearm for a fresh attack. The meeting between Vance and Zelensky comes amid Russia's advancement across Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, where it has captured several settlements mostly completely flattened by months of Russian bombardments over the past year. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now head to South America for some updates from that region. In Ecuador's election, incumbent President Daniel Noboa holds a narrow lead with 90% of the votes counted. Noboa has 44.4%, while rival Luisa Gonzalez has 43.9%. The race remains too close to call and a second-round runoff seems likely. Tensions are high in the country, which is facing ongoing violence. Chilean authorities have issued evacuation alerts for the south as wildfires rage in the region. So far, at least one person has died. The government said the move aims to protect more than 860,000 people. Chile's government ordered the evacuation in regions of imminent risk, urging residents to leave their homes and seek refuge in safe areas. Nicaragua's government has sharply criticised the Vatican, calling it depraved. The remarks follow an interview with exiled Bishop Rolando Alvarez, a strong critic of President Daniel Ortega. This is one of the harshest attacks on the Vatican yet by the nation. The Ortega government has accused Catholic institutions of trying to undermine the regime. A US federal court has blocked the Trump administration's plans to send 3 Venezuelan immigrants held in New Mexico to Guantanamo Bay. Lawyers for the detainees argued that the men were wrongfully accused of ties to a violent gang. They requested a temporary restraining order to prevent the transfer, citing concerns over access to legal counsel and due process. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has condemned the US sanctions on Iran's oil sector. He called the measures arbitrary and against international law. Rodriguez also warned of the negative impact this could have on the stability of the region. The sanctions imposed by President Donald Trump on February the 6th target entities, ships and individuals from countries like China, India and the UAE. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has called for his ministers to resign. Environment Minister Susana Mohammed is the second official to step down in a week. Tensions have risen over the presence of Petro's scandal-hit aides in government. Petro says the reshuffle aims to ensure his agenda is carried out effectively. Here are the latest in this report.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro has asked his ministers and senior officials to resign amid rising tensions in his government, days after publicly criticizing his cabinet on live television. The move follows a 5-hour televised meeting last Tuesday, where Petro accused several ministers, including those in trade, education and health, of failing to deliver key projects. On social media, he confirmed upcoming cabinet changes to ensure better implementation of his agenda. Earlier on Sunday, Environment Minister Susana Muhammad became the second official to resign in a week after the heated meeting.
Realmente, como feminista y como mujer, yo no me puedo sentar en esta mesa de gabinete de nuestro proyecto progresista con Armando Benedetti.
Ministers have also voiced concerns over the presence of Petro's close aide, Armando Benedetti, who is under investigation for illegal campaign financing and has faced domestic abuse allegations.
Y no me parece en este gobierno las actitudes de Laura Sarabia con nosotros, conmigo, que me ha tocado decirle, respéteme, que soy la vicepresidenta, y no me parece, y respeto a Benedetti, pero no comparto, presidente, su decisión. La respeto porque usted es el jefe de Estado y es el presidente, pero no comparto su decisión.
Additionally, there is discontent over the appointment of Laura Sarabia as foreign minister, despite her involvement in past political scandals.
Disculpe, presidente, que sea tan honesta, pero como se trata de hablarle de frente al país, yo hoy pongo sobre la mesa los temas que ya lo he dicho en privado, que se los he dicho a usted, y hoy los pongo públicamente.
The political shake-up also comes just weeks after some ministers took office, including Sarabia, and the ministers for Finance, Information and Transport. Bureau Report, NewsX.
That's all we have time for, but we'll be back very soon with more of your latest international news.